Two men, two voices that echoed through the halls of American history. One preached peaceful protest, the other righteous defiance. One wore a suit and spoke of love, the other glasses and fire and warned, by any means necessary. They never walked the same road, but both bled on the same battlefield. Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X icons, opposites, brothers in struggle. But why did their paths diverge so sharply? Why did one dream of harmony while the other demanded justice with clenched fists? Was it ideology, religion, trauma, or was it simply strategy? This is not a debate of who was right. It's an exploration of why they were different and what we can learn from both. Because the truth is, every revolution needs more than one voice. In this journey, we'll trace their lives, unpack their philosophies, and dig into the psychology behind their choices. From pulpits to prisons, from boycotts to bullet wounds, this is the untold story of two warriors fighting for the soul of a nation. Stay with me. What you're about to hear is not just history, it's a map to power, purpose, and the price of real change. Shall I continue with Section 2? Origins of belief childhoods that shaped them? Every revolution starts not with a speech, but with a scar, and to understand Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr., we must travel back to where it all began. Martin Luther King Jr., born into a comfortable middle-class home in Atlanta. His father was a respected preacher, his house a sanctuary of books, sermons, and structure. Martin grew up learning that love could conquer hate, that faith, discipline, and dignity were weapons just as sharp as any sword. But don't mistake comfort for complacency. Even young Martin saw the cracks in the American dream, like when his white childhood friends' parents told them they couldn't play together anymore. That wound never fully healed. Now, shift the lens. Malcolm Little, later Malcolm X, born in Omaha, Nebraska. His father, a passionate follower of Marcus Garvey, was murdered likely by white supremacists. His mother, institutionalized. The state broke his family apart not by fate, but by design. Foster homes, juvenile centers, crime. While Martin was learning about nonviolence, Malcolm was learning to survive violence. Both boys saw racism, but through different windows. One saw it as a sickness to be healed, the other as a system to be burned down. Their childhoods didn't just shape their pain, they forged their philosophies, and long before they became leaders, they were already walking two very different paths to freedom. In the next section, we'll dive deeper into their spiritual foundations, how Christianity and Islam didn't just guide their words, but carved their identities. What if I told you that behind every revolution, there is a religion shaping its soul? For Martin Luther King Jr., that soul was rooted in Christianity. The son of a Baptist preacher, Martin's every breath was laced with the words of Jesus. Love your enemies, turn the other cheek, blessed are the peacemakers. Nonviolence wasn't just a strategy, it was a spiritual duty. Dr. King believed that only love could break the chains of hate. His movement was modeled on the teachings of Christ and the example of Gandhi, his weapon, moral pressure, confronting injustice not with fists, but with righteousness. Now enter Malcolm X. A man reborn behind prison walls, not through the Bible, but through the teachings of the Nation of Islam. While King preached forgiveness, Malcolm was taught that the white man was the devil, that self-respect came not from begging, but from separating, rising, and defending. Islam gave Malcolm structure, dignity, and a code: no alcohol, no drugs, no weakness, and above all, no more bowing. His religion taught that peace without justice is submission, that self-defense is not violence. But survival, their gods were the same, but their interpretations wildly different. One believed in turning enemies into allies, the other believed that true allies don't ask you to kneel first, and both believed that their faith wasn't just personal, it was revolutionary. In the next section, we'll explore how those beliefs turned into action, how these men spoke to the world, and how their words became weapons. Words can build nations or start revolutions, and both Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X were master wordsmiths, but they spoke different dialects of the same rage. Dr. King's voice was a sermon, calm, powerful, poetic. I have a dream, 4 words that reshaped a nation. His speeches lifted people above the pain, inspiring them to believe that change was possible within the system. He quoted the Constitution and Scripture in the same breath. His rhythm was church, his cadence was hope, and every time he marched, it was as if God himself was walking beside him. Now contrast that with Malcolm. His words didn't float, they cut. He didn't say, "I have a dream." He said, "I'm not going to sit at your table and watch you eat with nothing on my plate and call myself a diner." That wasn't a plea, it was a warning. Malcolm didn't sugarcoat reality, he shattered it. His metaphors were sharper than bullets. You don't stick a knife in a man's back 9 inches, pull it out 6 inches, and call it progress. While King urged black Americans to turn the other cheek, Malcolm asked them why they were still getting slapped in the first place. King's language brought white allies, Malcolm's language brought black pride. One was building bridges, the other fortresses, and yet both were necessary because progress requires the dream and the demand. The whisper of peace and the thunder of justice. In the next section, we'll zoom in on how each man saw white America not just as a system, but as a psychological force to confront. To fight a system, you must first define it. And both King and Malcolm had a clear target, white America, but what they saw in it and how they responded to it revealed the deep divide in their philosophies. Martin Luther King Jr. believed in the promise of America. He saw the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, and the Bible as broken contracts, beautiful words betrayed by ugly deeds. But he still believed that white America could do better, that its soul was redeemable. He appealed to its conscience. He believed that racism was a sickness, not a core identity, and he fought to awaken the better angels of America's nature. But Malcolm saw white America not as sick, but as predatory. We didn't land on Plymouth Rock. Plymouth Rock landed on us. In his eyes, white supremacy wasn't an accident of history. It was intentional, structural, violent, so he didn't ask for redemption. He didn't beg for inclusion, he preached separation. Why integrate into a burning house? He asked. Where King believed in changing the system, Malcolm believed in escaping it, then rebuilding. But here's the twist. Neither man hated white people. Malcolm's rage was strategic, designed to wake black minds, and as he evolved, especially after his pilgrimage to Mecca, he began to see racism as a global disease, not just an American one. King, too, grew more radical over time. By the end, he was calling out economic injustice, military violence, and what he called the appalling silence of good white people. 2 visions, one reformer, one revolutionary, both right, both incomplete without the other. And what lies between those visions is where we find the psychology of fear and courage, the inner war each man had to fight. Every leader faces the crowd, but first he must face himself. Behind the speeches, behind the marches and microphones, there was fear and there was courage. Let's talk about Martin Luther King Jr. We remember him as calm, noble, unshakable, but did you know that King received thousands of death threats? That his house was bombed, that he cried at night wondering if he'd live to see 40. Courage for him wasn't about being fearless, it was about choosing to love anyway, choosing to walk through fire with an open heart. It was about sacrificing personal safety for collective salvation. Now look at Malcolm X. He was fearless, at least that's how he looked, But inside, Malcolm wrestled with paranoia, with betrayal. He was constantly monitored, hunted, and as he broke away from the Nation of Islam, the very group that gave him purpose, he knew he was becoming a marked man. Yet he didn't stop. He traveled, he spoke, he evolved. That's real courage. Not staying in your comfort zone, but outgrowing your past even when it might kill you. And let's not forget, both these men knew they were going to die for what they believed in. They didn't run, they leaned into it. They lived on borrowed time and used every second to speak truth to power. The psychology of fear is universal, but the psychology of purpose, that's what made Malcolm and Martin immortal. Up next, how the media shaped their images and how America learned to fear one and mourn the other in a war of ideas. Perception is the real battlefield, and no battlefield is more powerful than the media, the cameras, the newspapers, the headlines. They didn't just report on Malcolm and Martin, they shaped them. Martin Luther King Jr. was media gold, photogenic, charismatic. His speeches were clipped into sound bites of hope. The media framed him as the good black leader, calm, reasonable, willing to negotiate. A hero, yes, but one that white America could feel comfortable admiring. He became the symbol of peaceful resistance. Now look at Malcolm X. He was portrayed as the opposite, militant, dangerous, angry. His image was framed in black sunglasses, dark suits, raised fists. The media called him a black nationalist, a threat, the antithesis of King. But here's the dark psychology at play. America needed that binary. One saint, one menace, the angel who forgives, the demon who warns, but it wasn't truth, it was control. See, Malcolm wasn't calling for violence, he was calling for self-respect. He wasn't preaching hate, he was screaming against hypocrisy. And by painting him as radical, the media made King look more palatable. It's the oldest trick in propaganda. Demonize one voice so you can dilute the other, but over time, people started seeing through the manipulation. They began to realize that both men were fighting the same demon, just from opposite ends of the battlefield. In our next section, we'll examine what truly united them, the shift that brought Malcolm and Martin closer, just before the world lost them both. For years, they stood on opposite ends of the spectrum. King the dreamer, wrapped in hope and hymns. Malcolm the firebrand, cloaked in rage and realism. But what if I told you that in the final chapters of their lives, their paths began to converge? It didn't make headlines, it didn't shake the world, not yet. But beneath the surface, the impossible was unfolding. Martin began speaking louder, not just about race, but about poverty, war, and economic injustice. He started attacking capitalism, militarism, and inequality, not just racism. His message was no longer just about integration. It was about revolution of values. He called America the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. That's not the King we're taught in school, is it? And then there was Malcolm, fresh back from Mecca, where he'd seen Muslims of all races praying as equals. His ideology evolved. He began to speak of human rights, not just civil rights. He no longer saw all white people as enemies, only those who stood in the way of justice. Malcolm founded the Organization of Afro-American Unity, seeking alliances with oppressed people across the globe, and then, quietly, he reached out to Martin, letters, messages, a desire to meet, to unite their movement. And in 1964, on Capitol Hill, they finally met, a brief handshake, one photo, but it wasn't the end. It was a beginning that never got to bloom, because within 11 months, Malcolm X was assassinated. And within 3 years, so was Martin. The system feared their union more than their division, and it destroyed them both. In our next section, we'll examine the forces behind those assassinations and what their deaths truly meant to a country still struggling to listen. They silenced Malcolm, they silenced Martin, but they didn't silence the truth. Let's be clear, these men weren't killed because they were dangerous with guns. They were dangerous with ideas. Malcolm X was assassinated on February 21, 1965, standing at a podium mid-sentence, shot 21 times in front of his wife and children. The man who once feared no one died unprotected. The Nation of Islam took the blame. But the FBI, they were watching, tailing, manipulating. They had files, thick ones. They knew the threat Malcolm posed, a global black leader who was moving beyond race into universal liberation. Then, on April 4, 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. stood on a hotel balcony in Memphis. He had warned everyone the night before, "I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you." He knew he had stepped beyond safe boundaries, no longer just preaching dreams. He was now organizing a poor people's campaign, demanding economic justice, preparing to shut down Washington, D.C. with civil disobedience. That's when the bullet found him. One shot, one movement shattered, and America, it mourned, but it also moved on too fast. Their funerals were filled with tears, but their messages were buried right beside them. Statues went up, streets were renamed, but the systems they fought, still standing. Their deaths didn't kill the dream, they only reminded us how far we were from it. In our final section, we ask the hardest question of all. What now? What do we do with their legacy? Malcolm is gone, Martin is gone. But the question remains, what will you do with what they left behind? These weren't just men, they were movements in motion, they were visions carved from pain, they were blueprints not for worship, but for action, because the struggle they fought didn't end in 1965 or 1968. It lives on in police brutality, in poverty, in prisons packed with people of color, in education systems that erase our truth. So, what now? Do we fight like Malcolm, with fire, with clarity, with fearlessness, speaking truth, whether the world's ready or not? Or do we lead like Martin, with compassion, with patience, with strategy, dreaming big enough to shake a nation awake? Here's the truth most don't tell you. You need both. You need Malcolm's rage and Martin's grace. You need the voice that calls the system out and the hand that builds something better. You need to be able to march and to mentor, to protest and to plan, because revolutions don't come from one philosophy. They come from collisions of ideas and a shared refusal to accept injustice as normal. So this is your call. Read their speeches, learn their pain, honor their courage, but most of all, walk your path with purpose. Because somewhere between Martin's dream and Malcolm's warning lies the key to a freedom we've yet to unlock. And it's not about choosing sides. It's about choosing to stand in your school, in your neighborhood. In your mind, the next Malcolm or Martin doesn't have to be famous. They just have to be fearless enough to speak and wise enough to listen. The future is watching. What will you do? Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. may have walked different paths, one paved with fire, the other with faith, but both marched toward the same horizon, freedom, dignity, and justice for all. Their legacies are not relics of the past, but living blueprints for action, reminding us that real change demands both fierce truth and fearless love. In a world still wrestling with inequality and silence, their voices echo louder than ever, urging us not to choose between them, but to rise with the wisdom of both. The revolution they began is now ours to finish.